Hello, I'm the Daily Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company today. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad to welcome you to the world of stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or to help fall asleep more easily. So get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the gentle sound of rain in the background to wash away your stress and worries. In this video, you'll hear chilling stories, most of them based on true events, told with honesty and depth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now then, let's begin. Story: The Shadow in the Hallway. I never believed in ghosts, at least not until my daughter Maddie started waking us up in the middle of the night, sobbing uncontrollably, her small fingers trembling as she pointed toward the dark hallway outside her bedroom door. At first, my wife and I rushed in panic every time, fearing something terrible had happened. But every time, Maddie's pale, tear-streaked face whispered the same chilling words. "She's here again. The old lady who lives across the street. She's standing right there in the hallway." We exchanged worried glances, torn between concern and exhaustion. My wife knelt beside Maddie's bed, her voice soft and reassuring. "Sweetheart, it's just a nightmare. Mrs. Porter is a kind lady. She's lived across the street for years and would never come into our home." But Maddie shook her head fiercely, her wide eyes full of terror. "No. I swear I'm not lying. She was there. I saw her." Despite our reassurances, the crying didn't stop. Night after night, like clockwork, Maddie would wake us up, pointing trembling fingers into the dark hallway. I searched the house myself, walking through every room, checking every door. Everything was locked tight, just as it should be. We tried everything, leaving Maddie's door open, turning on night lights, even sleeping in the hallway next to her room. Nothing stopped the sobbing or the stories. Finally, desperate for answers, my wife decided to talk to Mrs. Porter herself. The next morning, we found the elderly woman sitting peacefully on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea. Her garden was immaculate, no weeds, perfectly trimmed hedges, a picture of serenity. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter," my wife greeted nervously. "We wanted to ask you about something. It might sound strange. Maddie keeps saying she sees you in our house at night, standing in the hallway. We know it can't be true, but we wanted to check in." Mrs. Porter blinked, then chuckled softly. Her laugh was warm, almost like a balm on our worried hearts. "Me? In your house?" "Heavens, no! I can barely manage my own stairs, let alone sneak into someone else's home." Her laugh made us feel foolish for doubting her. She invited us to visit any time for tea, waving off our concerns with a smile. That night, Maddie's cries pierced the silence again, louder, more desperate. We groaned, dragging ourselves out of bed once more. "We talked to Mrs. Porter today," my wife said firmly. "She hasn't been in our house. You're just dreaming, baby." Maddie sat upright, clutching her blanket tight. Her face was soaked with tears, her whole body trembling. "It's not a dream," she said, pointing a shaking finger toward the far corner of her room. "She's in my closet." Right there. I sighed deeply, trying to keep calm. "All right, I'm going to settle this once and for all." The heavy footsteps echoed as I walked to the closet. I reached for the handle, swung the door open, and froze. There she was. Mrs. Porter stood inside the dark closet, barely illuminated by a sliver of moonlight spilling through the window. Her face was expressionless at first, like a statue carved from stone. Then, slowly, a terrifying grin stretched impossibly wide across her face. She began to laugh. a hysterical, chilling laugh that echoed in the silent room. Maddie screamed, and my wife rushed in to carry her out while I stood frozen, heart pounding, backing slowly toward the bedroom door. As I left, I closed the closet door behind me, and the laughter continued. The memories of that night haunt me still. Some years ago, my friends and I planned a getaway to a remote cabin owned by a cousin of one of them. It was deep in the woods, so far back that no roads led directly there. We had to park miles away and hike 3/4 of a day just to reach the clearing. It sounded like an adventure, the kind you tell stories about for years. Unfortunately, my work schedule forced me to hike in alone, arriving well after everyone else had set up camp. I told myself one night alone wouldn't be so bad, maybe even relaxing. By the time I found a small clearing to pitch my tent, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky a hazy purple. Not quite day, not quite night. I set up my little one-person tent, built a small fire, and roasted a couple of hot dogs. I made a few s'mores, trying not to burn myself. The peacefulness of the woods settled over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. You hear people say that all the time, right? But alone in the woods at night, vulnerable and exposed, that feeling is different. It's primal. I told myself it was just nerves. The woods are full of animals after all. As night deepened, I heard rustling beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was a deer or a raccoon, but the sound circled the clearing over and over, like it was inspecting me. Curiosity, or maybe foolishness, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, shining the beam toward the noise. Suddenly, silence. Then a flash of movement. Something darted away into the trees. Just an animal, I told myself. I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. The cold seeped in, the sleeping bag doing little to keep me warm. Half asleep, half awake, I heard it. A low, rhythmic whisper, not in any language I could understand, coming from just outside the tent. My heart hammered as I lay frozen, listening. Then, in the moonlight filtering through the tent's thin fabric, I saw it. A pale hand pressed against the canvas. I bolted upright, gasping. The hand vanished instantly, and footsteps tore through the underbrush faster than any animal I'd ever heard. I grabbed my flashlight like a weapon, shining it frantically into the darkness. Nothing but silent trees stared back. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Days later, I woke one night with a terrible earache, throbbing and unbearable. I climbed out of bed, rubbing my ear, intending to wake my mum for help. But as I opened my bedroom door, I froze. Someone was sitting in the living room chair, just a few feet away. At first, I thought it was my mum or stepdad, maybe watching late-night TV, but the house was eerily silent. The only light came from the faint street lamp casting jagged shadows. I whispered, "Mum?" The figure slowly shook their head. Then again, slower this time, almost deliberately. A chill crawled up my spine. Their face was all wrong, distorted, like a smeared photograph. Features didn't line up, too stretched, too high, too low. The more I stared, the more terrified I became. I retreated back to my room, closed the door, and pulled the blanket over my head. I told myself it was just my imagination. But when I peeked out moments later, the figure stood in my doorway. Tall, taller than anyone I knew, their head tilted to one side like a curious dog. They were nodding violently, jerky motions that didn't match the strange smile on their face. I was frozen in fear. Eventually, I hid under the covers again. The silence that followed was suffocating. When dawn finally broke, I bolted out of bed, desperate for safety. That's when I realized some nightmares never end. The days after that night passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. I kept replaying the image of that twisted face in my doorway, the jerky nodding, the unnatural smile burned into my mind like a scar. My parents tried to brush it off as a vivid nightmare, a child's overactive imagination, but deep down I knew what I'd seen was real. The nights didn't get any better. Sometimes I'd wake to the faintest sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door, soft, deliberate, almost stalking. Sometimes I'd feel the cold weight of a presence beside my bed, even when no one was there. The shadows seemed to shift and thicken in the corners of the room, and the air grew heavy, suffocating. My mom and stepdad locked every door and window, triple-checked the bolts, but nothing could keep it out. It was like the darkness itself had taken root in our home. One night my stepdad stayed up late, baseball bat in hand, determined to catch whoever or whatever it was. Around 2 in the morning, a faint rustling echoed from the hallway. He tensed, gripping the bat tight, and flipped on the light. The hallway was empty. But as he looked back toward the living room chair, the very spot where I had first seen the figure, it began to rock slowly, as if someone had just stood up. They couldn't take it anymore. We couldn't take it anymore. A few months later, we packed up our lives and moved. The memories, the fear, the laughter echoing from an empty closet, the distorted smile, the nodding in the dark, stayed with me like shadows on my soul. Even now, sometimes, late at night, in the silence of a new home, I swear I see that face lurking just beyond the corner of my eye. It smiles, it waits. It's strange how a child's fear can reveal truths adults ignore. In the years that followed, I learned that sometimes the things we see in the dark are echoes of stories we don't want to face. Stories hidden behind closed doors and unspoken fears. Maddie's terror was real. Whatever haunted our home wasn't just a figment of imagination. I've often wondered, was it the spirit of Mrs. Porter, or something else, something darker, wearing her face like a mask? Some nights I feel it watching me still, and I know, deep down, it's never really left. Reflection. Our minds try to protect us by rationalizing the inexplicable. We call them nightmares, stress, imagination, but sometimes the truth is more terrifying. It lurks in the shadows between reason and belief. And once you've seen it, you can never unsee. Thank you for listening to Maddie's story, a tale of childhood fear, the thin veil between reality and nightmare, and a haunting that refuses to fade. If you've ever experienced something unexplainable, you're not alone. The shadows are always watching. Story. Alone in the woods. The idea was simple. A quiet getaway, a break from the noise of the city, and a chance to reconnect with friends in the heart of nature. A cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest road, nestled among towering pines and the endless song of birds. It was supposed to be an adventure, something we'd laugh about for years to come. But as it turned out, I was the only one who didn't arrive with the group. Work had delayed me. While my friends set off early in the morning, I found myself stuck at the office, staring at my computer screen, watching the clock tick mercilessly toward the afternoon. I was forced to make the hike alone, hours behind them, through thick forest trails I barely knew. By the time I finally reached the clearing, the sun was already dipping low, the sky a bruised purple and gold. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, creeping closer like silent fingers reaching out to touch the earth. I didn't want to admit it, but a flicker of unease had already taken root deep inside me. The clearing was just large enough for a small tent, bordered by ancient trees that seemed to lean in, whispering secrets only they could hear. I set up my gear quickly, hands moving on autopilot as the chill of approaching night pressed down. A fire was my only comfort, a fragile bubble of warmth against the cold and dark. I lit the kindling, coaxing a flame to life, then roasted a couple of hot dogs, charred unevenly but satisfying. I made s'mores, careful not to burn the marshmallows to a crisp, savoring the sweetness amid the loneliness. The forest was silent, except for the crackle of fire and the distant calls of night birds. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful, but the feeling beneath it all was different. Unshakable. I was being watched. You hear people say that in stories all the time. I had the feeling someone was watching me, and you think it's just nerves, paranoia. But when you're alone in the woods, miles from help, that feeling becomes something else entirely. It gnaws at your skin, seeps into your bones, a cold awareness that pulses beneath your skin. The rustling started softly at first, barely audible above the fire's hiss. But as the night wore on, it grew more deliberate. It circled the clearing, slow and steady, as if whatever was out there was pacing, observing. I tried to tell myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. Creatures of the night curious about the light and warmth. But the sound wasn't random. It repeated, circling like a predator stalking its prey. My heart pounded louder than the noises outside. Curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, aiming the beam toward the source. The rustling stopped immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, through the thin canvas of my tent, I saw it. A pale hand, pressing gently against the fabric, its translucent fingers illuminated faintly by the moonlight filtering through the trees. My breath caught. I couldn't move. The hand lingered as if hesitant, then vanished. Suddenly, footsteps shattered the silence, tearing through the underbrush with a frantic urgency. Branches snapped, leaves scattered. Whatever was out there fled. I scrambled from my tent, flashlight swinging wildly, heart racing. I scanned the woods. Nothing. No shadow, no figure. Just the silent trees standing watch. The cold crept deeper, chilling me to the bone as I huddled by the dying fire embers, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. Sleep was impossible. Minutes bled into hours. I lay awake, wide-eyed, caught between wakefulness and exhaustion. The forest seemed to breathe around me, alive, waiting. When dawn finally came, spilling soft gold light across the canopy, relief washed over me like warm water. I packed my things quickly, eager to escape the oppressive solitude and the unseen eyes that haunted the night. The hike back to the cabin was grueling. My legs ached and my mind spun with questions. When I finally emerged into the clearing where my friends sat, laughter and warmth washing over me like a balm, I felt almost grateful to be among people again. But as I told them about the night, their smiles faded. One of them leaned closer, voice low. "You're serious, right?" I nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, I swear." That's when the cousin who owned the cabin shared the story. Years ago, a homeless man lived deep in these woods, a recluse, disconnected from the world. One day, he disappeared without a trace. Since then, locals whispered of strange things, flickering lights, chilling whispers, figures glimpsed between the trees. Stories passed down like shadows lurking just beyond the firelight. I forced a laugh, but inside a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Those woods were not just home to animals. They held secrets. And that night, I had seen one of them. The next morning, even as the sunlight filtered softly through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, a lingering unease clung to me like a shadow. My friends chattered around the cabin, unaware, or unwilling to believe, the terror I had experienced alone in those woods. That night, the laughter around the campfire seemed hollow to me. The crackling flames illuminated faces smiling, but inside I felt the cold grip of fear tightening its hold. Sleep was a stranger. My eyes flicked open at every whisper of wind or snap of a twig, heart hammering in my chest. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, more alive, as if watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, the product of isolation and exhaustion, but the forest held its secrets close, and I was not ready to be let in. On the third night, something new happened. I awoke suddenly, pulled from the thin veil between sleep and wakefulness by a voice, soft, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It wasn't a language I could understand. The words twisted and morphed, strange syllables spoken in a cadence both chilling and mesmerizing. I lay frozen, listening as the voice repeated its endless chant from just outside my tent. The thin fabric rustled. Then, as I forced my eyes open, moonlight revealed a shape. A pale, ghostly hand pressed again against the tent's canvas, fingers curling like they wanted to reach inside. Panic surged through me, but I was rooted to the spot. Suddenly the hand withdrew, and footsteps pounded away through the forest, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed hurriedly, my hands trembling. The silence of the forest felt heavier now, oppressive. I told my friends I was heading back early. They didn't ask questions. The hike out was grueling. My legs ached. Every rustle in the underbrush sent a jolt of fear through me. When I finally reached my car, the open road felt like salvation. But the woods had marked me. Even months later, I would hear the whispering voice in my dreams, see the pale hand reaching through the dark. I learned later that the homeless man who once lived in those woods was never found. Locals whispered he might have become part of the forest, a restless spirit trapped between worlds. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, if you listen closely, you can still hear his chant, soft, rhythmic, echoing through the trees. Story: The Forgotten Chamber Beneath the City. My job isn't glamorous, but it's mine. I'm an engineer working on the city's ancient sewage system, a vast, tangled web of tunnels and pipes buried beneath the streets, some dating back over a century. Most people don't even know these tunnels exist. They're dark, foul-smelling and dangerous, but to me, they are a secret world, one where the city's history sleeps beneath the surface. That Monday morning started like any other. I was about halfway through a routine inspection, a long walk of 4 miles under the city, through narrow passageways lined with damp bricks and corroded pipes. My headlamp was the only light slicing through the darkness. The smell of sewage and mold was thick, sometimes choking, but I was used to it. There was a strange comfort in this silence, away from the noise and chaos above. I paused to eat an energy bar, my footsteps echoing faintly as I moved on. I reached a part of the tunnels I hadn't been in before, a newer branch, or so the map said. The floor looked solid, but something was off. Without warning, the bricks beneath me crumbled. I fell through a hidden cavity, tumbling down into the blackness below. Pain shot through my left wrist as I instinctively braced myself, the ground hitting hard beneath me. A cold shock ran through my body as I landed in what felt like water. My headlamp flew off somewhere in the fall, leaving me in pitch darkness for a few terrifying seconds. I fumbled blindly, my fingers searching for the torch switch. A small, weak light flickered on, casting a yellow beam into the chamber where I'd landed. And then I saw it. Bones. Human bones, scattered in a chaotic pile, cracked skulls, rib fragments, jaws, broken limbs, all mixed together in a silent grave beneath the city streets. I swallowed hard. This was no ordinary tunnel. It was a forgotten burial chamber, sealed and hidden beneath layers of brick and earth for who knows how long. My heart hammered in my chest as I scanned the room with the torch. Then movement caught my eye. From cracks and crevices in the walls, dozens of rats, filthy, feral, each at least a foot long, began to emerge. They scrambled over the bones, sniffing and twitching nervously. My skin crawled. I reminded myself they were just animals, part of this underground ecosystem. But then, from the darkest corner, something bigger appeared. A monstrous rat, nearly 2.5 feet long, stepped into the light. Its eyes glowed red, and its yellowed teeth gleamed menacingly. The other rats backed away, submissive. I was frozen in place, heart pounding wildly. The creature crept closer, my breath caught in my throat. Then it did the strangest thing. It bit into a skull lying near me, gripping it firmly with its teeth, and began to drag an entire skeleton, still intact with skull, ribs, pelvis and limbs, across the floor toward a narrow crevice in the wall. It paused and turned its glowing eyes on me. A warning, I think. This was its territory. These were its bones. I slowly backed away, my legs weak. Hours later, after what felt like a lifetime, I climbed out of that chamber, shaken to the core. Emerging from that underground chamber, I thought the worst was behind me. But the experience had left a mark far deeper than the bruises and the broken wrist I carried from my fall. The city above hummed with its usual life, oblivious to the dark secrets buried beneath its streets. Yet I found myself haunted by the image of that monstrous rat dragging the complete skeleton across the chamber floor, a silent guardian of forgotten souls. Weeks passed. The physical pain of my injury slowly healed, but the memories clawed at my mind with relentless persistence. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. Strange noises echoed when I was alone. Sleep became a fragile thing, invaded by dreams of bone and darkness. My employers noticed my deteriorating condition and insisted I see a counselor. Diagnosed with serophobia, the fear of rats, I agreed to therapy. I nodded along, knowing that no amount of counseling would ease my true fear. It wasn't the rats that terrified me. It was the thought of being trapped, consumed, forgotten, just like those ancient bones in that dark chamber. During therapy, I learned there was a name for that fear. Phagophobia, the fear of being eaten alive. It struck a chord deep within me, a primal terror I had never acknowledged before. The chamber I had fallen into was an uncharted relic of the past, swallowed by time and city growth. I imagined who those bones had belonged to, people long dead, their stories erased and replaced by concrete and shadow. Were their spirits restless? Did they linger in the darkness beneath the city, waiting for release? Every time I returned to the tunnels, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The walls seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I no longer felt at home underground. The sanctuary had become a prison. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear scratching at the window or see fleeting shadows moving just beyond the streetlight's glow. The past never truly stays buried, and neither do the fears it awakens. Story: The Donner Party. Trapped in the Sierra Nevada. The summer of 1846 was full of hope and promise for the families embarking on a journey westward. Over 500 souls gathered, united by a common dream, to start fresh in the fertile lands of California. Among them were the Donner and Reed families, whose patriarchs led with determination and faith. The wagons rolled steadily across the dusty plains and rolling hills. The air was thick with the scent of summer heat and campfire smoke. Days were long and grueling. The sun beat down relentlessly as oxen pulled the heavy loads and the travelers pushed forward, driven by anticipation and necessity. Tensions ran high. The journey was arduous. The rough trails tested every ounce of patience. Supplies were carefully rationed, and every face bore the fatigue of constant travel. Yet stories were shared by the firelight, songs sung, and hopes kindled. As they neared the Sierra Nevada mountains, the mood grew serious. The looming peaks stood as silent sentinels, white-capped and forbidding. The party knew the mountains were a natural barrier, a test of endurance and resolve. A shortcut proposed by an ambitious guide promised to save them precious time. But the untested trail was treacherous, filled with rocky passes, dense forests, and unpredictable weather. The decision to take this new route was pivotal, sealing their fate. For weeks, the party struggled through unforgiving terrain. Heat gave way to cold nights. Supplies dwindled. Oxen weakened. The harsh desert stretched before them after crossing the Great Salt Lake, scorching and barren, sucking the strength from men and animals alike. Arguments broke out. Tempers flared. The once unified group began to splinter into smaller factions, each focused on survival. One such altercation turned deadly. John Snyder, impatient and cruel, whipped an ox mercilessly. James Reed, protective and authoritative, intervened. The confrontation escalated, culminating in Reed stabbing Snyder in self-defense. The group's fragile order shattered. Reed was banished, forced to leave behind his family and friends, condemned to survive alone in the wilderness. Meanwhile, winter crept forward. Snow fell early and thick, blanketing the mountains in cold and silence. The party was trapped. Cabins hastily built of pine logs became their only refuge against the bitter wind. Inside, the atmosphere was grim and desolate. Hunger gnawed relentlessly. Cattle died in droves, their frozen carcasses piled in the snow. As food ran dangerously low, hope waned. The darkest horrors began. Winter's grip on the Sierra Nevada was merciless and unyielding. The snow fell in endless waves, burying the landscape beneath a thick, cold blanket that refused to melt. The wind howled through the valleys like the cries of the lost, and the survivors of the Donner Party were trapped in an unforgiving prison of ice and despair. Inside the fragile cabins they had constructed, 60 souls huddled together, men, women, and children, all fighting to keep the cold and hunger at bay. The log walls, hastily assembled, offered little protection from the bitter chill that seeped into every corner. The roofs leaked, and the floors were mere packed earth. Fires barely kept the biting cold from their bones. The food stores had long since dwindled to nothing but memories. The oxen, once their trusted beasts of burden, had fallen one by one, their frozen bodies discarded in the snow. The carcasses were a stark reminder of their dwindling hope. Desperation festered among the survivors, trust eroded. Some kept to themselves, eyes hollow with starvation. Others clung desperately to their loved ones, unwilling to let go despite the encroaching hopelessness. The idea of survival became a grim calculus, where the value of a life was measured by the hunger it could stave off. One night, the fragile boundary of humanity shattered. Patrick Dolan, driven mad by hunger, fever and cold, stripped naked and ran into the stormy darkness. Hours later, he returned, a broken man who died shortly after. His death was not the end of his story. The survivors, starved beyond reason, resorted to what they had feared and despised: cannibalism. Dolan's flesh was stripped, dried and rationed among those still clinging to life. Some resisted the temptation as long as they could, hunting and fishing to avoid the unspeakable. Others gave in quickly, turning away from the toil of the hunt toward the easier sustenance of human flesh. The once proud pioneers, bound by faith and family, were now reduced to this bitter reality. Further tragedy unfolded when two Native Americans, Luis and Salvador, weakened and starving, were discovered by the party. Instead of being offered aid, they were murdered, their bodies butchered to feed others. The acts of survival were often mingled with cruelty. Days blurred into nights. The storm raged outside, while inside the cabins the living fought not only the elements, but their own fears and fading sanity. Margaret Reed, wife of the exiled James Reed, promised to pay double for the oxen they would need once free of this nightmare. A flicker of hope that felt almost cruel against the backdrop of suffering. But the end was near. As rescue parties finally penetrated the mountains and found the starving survivors, many were barely alive, emaciated, frostbitten, and forever scarred by the ordeal. The Donner Party's tale is a haunting testament to the extremes of human endurance, a dark saga of hope, loss, and the will to survive against all odds. Their suffering serves as a solemn reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the resilience and fragility of the human spirit. Story: the Sonoma County hitchhiker murders. The sun had long set on the quiet roads of Sonoma County when Maureen Louise Sterling and Yvonne Lisa Weber, two 12-year-old best friends, embarked on what should have been a simple journey home. The air was crisp and the night sky glittered with stars. The girls had spent the evening at the Redwood Empire Ice Arena, skating and laughing, unaware of the shadow that awaited them. Their last known whereabouts were along Geyserville Road, northwest of Santa Rosa, where they attempted to hitchhike. In those days, hitchhiking was common, a practical means of travel in sprawling rural areas, but the innocence of the act would soon be shattered. Days turned into weeks, then months, with no sign of the girls. Families, friends, and law enforcement searched desperately, hoping for a miracle. But their bodies were discovered almost a year later, on December 28th, a few miles north of Freeze Valley Road. Their remains were skeletal, robbed of flesh by time and the elements, but the tragedy was undeniable. Near their remains lay a single earring, orange beads, and a delicate 14-carat gold necklace adorned with a cross, silent testimonies to the girls' stolen youth. The cause of death could not be conclusively determined from their skeletal remains, leaving investigators frustrated and the public in fear. The terror did not end there. Only a month later, on March 4th, 1972, 19-year-old art student Kim Wendy Allen vanished. She was last seen hitchhiking to school, carrying a large wooden soy barrel painted with red Chinese characters, a seemingly innocuous detail that would later take on a sinister significance. Her body was found the next day in an embankment along a creek bed, her death violent and unexplained. The men who had last given her a ride were eventually cleared through polygraph tests, but the mystery deepened. Similar disappearances followed. Each young woman hitchhiking alone vanished without a trace or found brutally murdered. The pattern was chillingly consistent. Authorities faced an uphill battle. Multiple suspects surfaced, ranging from known serial killers to local criminals, but none fit all the pieces. At one point, Kenneth Bian and Angelo Buono Jr., the notorious hillside stranglers of Los Angeles, were considered suspects. Their crimes bore resemblance to the Sonoma murders, but lack of concrete evidence prevented any charges. Attention then turned to Frederick Manali, a creative writing instructor at Santa Rosa Junior College. In 1976, he was involved in a fatal car accident. Among his possessions were disturbing sketches depicting sadomasochistic scenes of young women, including one resembling Kim Wendy Allen. Despite searches, no direct link to the murders was found. Another suspect was the infamous Ted Bundy, who had a history of abducting and murdering young women across several states in the 1970s. Though Bundy had spent time in neighboring counties, credit card records placed him far from Sonoma during several of the murders, effectively ruling him out. Investigators also considered the Zodiac Killer, who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Similarities between symbols found near victims and Zodiac communications added to the intrigue. Arthur Lee Allen, a prime Zodiac suspect, lived near Santa Rosa and had a criminal history involving child molestation, but DNA testing ultimately exonerated him. The killings continued to haunt Sonoma County. The community grappled with fear, uncertainty, and anger. Parents forbade their children from hitchhiking. Local law enforcement increased patrols, but the killer or killers remained at large. Despite decades of investigations and multiple leads, the case remains officially unsolved, a dark chapter in California's history that still chills the spine. As the years rolled on, the Sonoma County community remained gripped by fear and sorrow. Each new disappearance reopened old wounds. Each discovery of a victim's remains deepened the mystery. Families waited in anguish while investigators chased shadows through a maze of false leads and dead ends. One of the most chilling victims was Carolyn Nayan Davis, a 14-year-old runaway who vanished in early 1973. Last seen hitchhiking near the Garberville post office, her body was found months later, mere meters from the remains of Maureen Sterling and Yvonne Weber. For the first time, coroners were able to determine a cause of death: strychnine poisoning, a cruel and agonizing way to die. Near her body, a symbol associated with witchcraft, a carrier of spirits, was found scrawled on the ground, fueling whispers of dark rituals. The murders exhibited a disturbing pattern linking at least 8 unsolved female homicides in the region, yet no single perpetrator was ever convicted. Theories abounded. Some speculated a single serial killer, others suggested a network of criminals, and a few whispered of occult cults operating in the shadows. Local law enforcement was stretched thin and often criticized for their handling of the case. In a time before modern forensic technology, investigators relied on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence, both frustratingly unreliable. As suspicions swirled, several high-profile suspects entered the fray. Kenneth Bian and Angelo Buono Jr., the Hillside Stranglers, were seriously considered. Their brutal strangulations and dumping of bodies on hillsides echoed the Sonoma murders. However, no concrete evidence linked them to the crimes. Frederick Manali, the college instructor with disturbing drawings, was another. Police searched his home thoroughly, but found no direct proof tying him to the murders, leaving his involvement uncertain. Ted Bundy, the notorious serial killer responsible for dozens of deaths across multiple states, was an obvious suspect. His violent modus operandi and presence in Northern California made him a viable candidate. Yet detailed credit card records confirmed his whereabouts in Washington state during some murders, eliminating him as a suspect. The Zodiac Killer, infamous for his cryptic letters and brutal killings, was also considered. Similarities in symbols found near victims and in Zodiac communications prompted investigations, but no definitive connection was ever established. As the years turned into decades, DNA analysis became the key to solving many cold cases elsewhere. Sadly, for the Sonoma County hitchhiker murders, usable DNA evidence was scarce or degraded, frustrating efforts to identify the killer. Meanwhile, the community remained vigilant. Parents warned children never to accept rides from strangers. Neighborhood watch groups formed, and local police increased patrols along the highways where many victims had last been seen. Yet the murders remained a painful enigma, a dark stain on the idyllic landscapes of Sonoma County. To this day, the true identity of the Sonoma County hitchhiker murderer remains unknown. The victims' memories live on, a solemn reminder of innocence lost and the shadows that sometimes lurk just beneath the surface of quiet towns. Story: The Silent Call. I grew up in a small town where secrets were as thin as the walls between houses and gossip traveled faster than the wind. Everyone knew your name, your family, your mistakes, even before you made them. When I was 9 years old, my life was turned upside down. My father was arrested for driving under the influence. The news hit the town like a thunderclap. I didn't learn about it from my family. No, I heard it the next day, from the kids at school. 2 of them were from police families, and they took cruel delight in sharing every detail. The whispers started low and innocent, but soon they turned to mocking laughter and pointed fingers. I was tormented relentlessly. Kids I thought were friends turned their backs. I was branded with a scarlet letter of shame. I heard terrible things, that my mother would be left alone, struggling to raise me, that my father would be locked away for years, never to come home. I was told the local news would send a camera crew to film the police dragging my dad away, kicking down our front door. I believed every word. Fear and shame gripped me so tightly I could hardly breathe. I barely slept at night, and food lost all taste. My world felt like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. My parents said nothing. They shielded me from the truth, hoping silence would protect me. But one day, I broke. I couldn't carry the weight any longer. I demanded answers. They sat me down gently and explained. My father had lost his license, paid fines, but would not go to jail. It wasn't as terrible as the rumors suggested, but the damage had been done. That fear, that shame lodged deep inside me like a wound that wouldn't heal. Years passed, but the echoes of those days haunted me. When I was 17, I fell in love, quietly, painfully. There was a girl I admired from afar, but I was too shy to speak. Instead, I wrote her a letter. I agonized over every word, trembling as I sealed the envelope and slipped it into her family's mailbox. For a moment, hope blossomed in my chest. But it was short-lived. Within days, copies of my letter appeared everywhere, plastered on lampposts, stuck to walls, and on the backs of bus seats. Strangers read my private words aloud, laughing cruelly. I was mocked in the streets, insulted and humiliated. I wanted to disappear. When I turned 21, I left. I caught the first bus out of town and vowed never to return. I severed ties with my family, deleted all my social media accounts, cancelled my phone. The past was dead to me. I arrived in the city, a sprawling maze of concrete and neon, filled with millions of strangers. It was overwhelming and cold, but it was also a chance for a new beginning. The city was nothing like the small town I had left behind. Towering buildings loomed overhead. Streets buzzed with 1,000 lives moving in every direction, and the neon lights never seemed to dim. I was a stranger in a vast, indifferent world. When my bus rolled into the terminal late at night, the chill in the air was biting. The station was deserted, save for a lone coffee stall shuttered for the night and an out-of-order restroom sign flickering weakly. I stepped out, clutching my backpack, scanning for a sign of shelter or a place to rest. The streets stretched empty, shadows swallowing the corners. Buildings loomed dark and silent. My hands dug into my pockets, empty. My wallet was gone. Panic surged. I turned sharply, shouting for the woman who had brushed past me moments before, the woman who had stolen my money. She didn't look back. She disappeared into the night like a ghost. Desperation fueled my pursuit. The streets twisted and turned, leading me to derelict buildings, abandoned lots strewn with broken glass and graffiti. I stumbled, cursed under my breath coming in ragged gasps. The thief was fast, too fast, weaving through the maze of dark alleys. Then, behind a crumbling garage, I saw her exchange my stolen cash for a small packet from a man clad in expensive clothing. The dealer's eyes gleamed coldly. I wanted to rush in, demand my money back, confront them both, but fear held me back. What if the dealer was armed? What if violence erupted? I hung back, watching helplessly as the woman disappeared into the darkness and the dealer vanished down another street. Determined, I followed her, weaving through more dark streets, past groups of emaciated figures huddled in doorways and shadows. I was confronted with a world I never expected, people living in squalor, caught in a desperate cycle of poverty, addiction, and neglect. The thief led me to a dilapidated building, her home and sanctuary. Inside, she tended to a frail woman, wrapped in rags, her skin drawn tight over protruding bones. It was her mother, dying of cancer, without access to medical care. The woman's suffering was raw and painful, yet tenderly met with love and care from the thief. She whispered apologies for stealing, explaining her desperation to ease her mother's pain with drugs she could only get through theft. I was shocked, ashamed of my initial anger. This was a hidden world, one of invisible suffering, unseen by most, ignored by society. Then, without warning, a group of men in expensive suits burst in, demanding the occupants leave, calling them trash and filth. But something changed. Figures emerged from the shadows, pale, skeletal, and terrifying, and in an instant the men were seized and choked, collapsing to the ground. The thief called them wraiths, spirits of those who suffered great injustice, now exacting vengeance. The invaders were stripped of their possessions and dragged away, powerless. I watched in frozen horror and awe. This place, this hidden world, was more than just poverty and addiction. It was a battleground between the forgotten and the powerful. As the thief wept beside her mother's still form, I realized the true depth of pain and resilience around me, and I knew my life would never be the same. Story: the doorman of the shadowed city. Growing up in a small town, I believed the world was simple, safe even. The streets I walked were familiar, faces recognizable. I thought I knew what danger looked like. I was wrong. My father's arrest shattered the illusion. Overnight, I became the subject of whispers, cruel jokes, and sideways glances. The town I called home turned its back on me. I learned early how quickly innocence could be stolen, replaced by fear and shame. By the time I was old enough, I left. I sought refuge in the city, a sprawling maze of lights, noise, and strangers. I thought anonymity would protect me, but the city had its own darkness. One restless night, sleep eluded me. I wandered the streets, searching for something I couldn't name. The city's heartbeat throbbed in the distance, but the alleys I walked were silent and shadowed. Under flickering street lamps, long, jagged shadows stretched across cracked sidewalks. I felt eyes on me, watching from the darkness. The feeling was heavy, almost tangible. Turning a corner, I saw her, a young woman standing motionless in a doorway. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her hair a wild tangle. Her eyes were pools of deep sadness and untold stories. Before I could speak, my attention shifted. Seated near her was a man, or something like a man, in a worn wooden chair. His face was a pale mask of emptiness, but what struck me most were his eyes. There were none. Dark, hollow sockets stared into nothingness. Without moving his lips, he spoke. "I am the doorman," he said. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "The one who decides who may stay and who must leave." The woman touched his shoulder gently. "What do you think?" she asked. His lips curled into a slow, unsettling smile. "He told me I could stay. There was food, shelter, and company. But this place was unlike anything I'd known. It was a hidden world beneath the city, a realm of shadows and silence where the forgotten and the broken gathered. I was no longer just a visitor. I had stepped into a place where the line between life and death blurred. Stepping deeper into that hidden world beneath the city, I quickly realized this was no ordinary shelter. The air was thick with a mixture of despair, hope, and something almost otherworldly. The people here moved silently, shadows themselves, living in forgotten corners, caught between worlds. The doorman led me through narrow, dimly lit corridors where walls were covered in peeling paint and faded graffiti. The scent of damp stone mingled with faint traces of incense and something unidentifiable, a mixture of old pain and lingering memories. Around us, figures huddled in doorways or crouched on threadbare mats. Their faces were etched with hardship, eyes reflecting 1,000 untold stories. Some greeted the doorman with reverence, others with wary silence. He introduced me to a small group gathered around a flickering candle. They shared their tales, stories of loss, addiction, escape, and survival. Many had fallen through the cracks of society, rejected by the world above, finding refuge in this shadowed city. The young woman who had stood silently in the doorway was named Lila. She cared for her mother, a fragile woman ravaged by illness and years of neglect. Despite their surroundings, the tenderness between them was palpable. Lila confided that she stole not out of malice, but desperation, to buy medicine and ease her mother's unbearable pain. Her eyes held a quiet strength, defiant against the darkness that threatened to consume them. Suddenly, the tranquility shattered. A group of men in expensive suits stormed in, their voices dripping with contempt. They called the residents trash, junkies, and filth, demanding they leave the property. Their intentions were clear: to clear the space for development, to erase this forgotten community. But the doorman and the shadowed figures did not flinch. From the darkness emerged beings more terrifying than any threat outside. Skeletal, ragged shapes with no flesh or eyes. They moved silently, like wraiths born from pain and injustice. Their bony hands reached out, grasping the men and choking the life from them. Screams echoed, mingling with the crackle of candlelight and the shifting shadows. When the chaos subsided, the intruders lay unconscious, stripped of their possessions and dignity. The residents watched silently, their eyes hard but resolute. Lila wept beside her mother, whose breaths had grown shallow. The community mourned in silence, bound by shared pain and fierce determination. In that hidden world beneath the city, life and death danced an endless waltz. Forgotten by most, remembered by few, but never truly gone. And I knew from that night on I would carry their stories with me. A testament to survival, loss, and the quiet strength found in the darkest places. Story. The Whispering Woods. The Appalachian Mountains have always been a place where time seems to fold in on itself. Ancient trees whisper secrets carried on the wind, and shadows stretch long across moss-covered stones. For generations, stories of spirits and strange happenings have drifted through these woods like an eerie fog. To most, it's just nature's mystery. To me, it became a haunting reality. When my great-aunt passed away, she left me a parcel of land nestled deep in these mountains. It was a dense forest, wild and untouched, where sunlight struggled to break through the thick canopy. I imagined it as a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise and find peace. A group of friends and I planned a weekend retreat to a remote cabin on that land. Laughter, stories, and the warmth of a campfire awaited us. But fate had other plans. Work commitments delayed me, and I was forced to hike the last several miles alone, the trail twisting through towering pines and tangled underbrush. By the time I reached the cabin clearing, the sun was sinking behind the ridges, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I set up my tent on a soft bed of leaves, carefully removing sharp twigs. As night approached, I built a fire, its warm glow a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. I roasted a couple of hot dogs and made s'mores, savoring the simple comforts amid the wild. For a while the forest seemed peaceful, alive with the sounds of night creatures. Owls hooted in the distance, leaves rustled gently, and somewhere far off a brook sang a soft song. But as the stars blinked awake, a feeling settled over me. Something was wrong. A rustling began at the edge of the firelight, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. It circled the clearing slowly, as if pacing, watching. I told myself it was a deer, a raccoon, ordinary forest life. But the pattern was too purposeful. Then, carried on the cold night air, came a voice, low and rhythmic, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. The words twisted and turned, unnerving in their cadence. I froze, heart pounding. Through the thin canvas of my tent, moonlight revealed a pale hand pressed firmly against the fabric. The fingers were translucent, ethereal, cold as ice. I dared not move. The hand lingered for a moment, then vanished. Suddenly, footsteps thundered through the surrounding brush, snapping branches and scattering leaves as something fled into the dark. I sat trembling by the fire, flashlight in hand, eyes wide, unable to calm the racing pulse in my chest. Sleep became impossible. Minutes stretched into hours. The forest around me felt alive, watching, waiting. When dawn finally crept over the mountains, spilling soft light through the trees, relief washed over me like warm rain. But I knew the Whispering Woods held deeper secrets, and that night was only the beginning. The dawn brought a fragile sense of safety, but the shadows of the night clung to me like a second skin. I packed my gear in silence, the forest's stillness pressing down with an uneasy weight. The Whispering Woods had spoken to me, and I could not unhear their message. I followed the trail back toward the main cabin, every crunch of leaves beneath my boots echoing in the hollow silence. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches weaving a canopy that filtered the sunlight into ghostly patterns. The forest held its breath. As I walked, my mind replayed the night's terrors, the chanting voice, the pale hand, the frantic footsteps. Questions swirled, but no answers came. Reaching the cabin, I found my friends gathered around the fire, their faces bright with laughter and warmth. Their easy camaraderie was a sharp contrast to my gnawing unease. I hesitated to share my experience, fearing disbelief or dismissal. That night, as the group settled in, the woods stirred again. I awoke to a soft rustling outside my tent, different from the usual sounds of wildlife. Something deliberate, watching. I peered through the mesh. Moonlight revealed shifting shadows between the trees, elongated and unnatural. Then the chanting began again, low, rhythmic, weaving through the night air like a dark lullaby. This time, more distinct, a haunting melody that twisted the very fabric of the forest. My heart thundered. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The forest was alive with movement, pale figures gliding silently between the trees, their forms barely visible but unmistakably there. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the vastness. Suddenly, one figure broke away and approached. A woman, ethereal and shimmering, her eyes deep pools of sorrow. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. She extended a hand, beckoning. Fear and curiosity warred within me. I took a hesitant step forward. She led me deeper into the woods, past ancient oaks and twisted roots, toward a hidden glade bathed in silver light. There, a circle of stones encased a small pool of water, its surface smooth and mirror-like. The woman touched the water, and it rippled, revealing visions, faces of those long gone, trapped between worlds. She whispered, her voice at last audible, soft and mournful. These woods hold the souls of the forgotten. They seek peace, but are bound by pain. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, she faded like mist, leaving me alone in the whispering silence. I returned to the cabin, forever changed. The Whispering Woods were not just a place of nature, but a realm where the past lingered, where spirits reached out through the veil. And I was now part of their story, the lost letter. In the small town where I grew up, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. News, gossip, and secrets traveled faster than the wind, and everyone's business was fair game. When I was 9 years old, my life shattered. My father was arrested for driving under the influence. The news didn't stay within our family walls. It spilled out into the streets, classrooms, and playgrounds. The kids at school, some from families of police officers, whispered and laughed behind my back. Their words cut deeper than any physical wound. I became the target of relentless torment. I was called names, mocked, and excluded. I heard rumors that my mother would raise me alone, that my father would be imprisoned for years. I was told the local news would film the moment police broke down our door and dragged him away. I believed it all. Fear and shame wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Nights were filled with nightmares, and food lost all taste. My parents tried to shield me from the truth, but when I could no longer bear the silence, they finally told me what really happened. It wasn't as terrible as I'd imagined. My father lost his license and paid a fine. There was no jail time, but the damage was done. The pain of public shame lingered like a scar on my soul. As I grew older, the past refused to let go. At 17, I fell quietly in love with a girl from my school. Too shy to speak, I wrote her a letter. Every word carefully chosen, filled with hope and vulnerability. I slipped the letter into her mailbox and waited, heart pounding. But the hope turned to horror. Within days, photocopies of my letter were plastered everywhere, on lampposts, building walls, the backs of bus seats. Strangers read my private feelings aloud, mocking me in the streets. I wanted to disappear. By 21, I had left that town, vowing never to return. I severed ties with my family, deleted my social media accounts, cancelled my phone contract. The past was dead to me. I sought refuge in the anonymity of a sprawling city, a place where no one knew my name or my story. But no matter how far I ran, the shadows of my past followed. The city welcomed me with cold indifference. As the bus pulled into the terminal late that night, I felt swallowed by a concrete jungle. Buildings looming like silent giants. Streets deserted except for the flickering neon signs and the occasional stray dog rummaging through garbage. I clutched my bag tightly, every step echoing loudly in the vast emptiness. My heart pounded not just from the exhaustion of the journey, but from the gnawing hunger and fear that had settled in my gut since the moment I left home. With no money, no phone, and nowhere to go, I was utterly alone. The bitter truth settled over me like a winter chill. I was a stranger in a strange land. The first nights were the hardest. I sought shelter wherever I could, beneath the rusted awning of a closed-down store, in the shadows of a deserted park, or in the cramped corner of a homeless shelter, where the air was thick with despair and cigarette smoke. I watched faces worn by hardship, eyes hollow from too many broken dreams. I saw mothers clutching their children close, men whose hands trembled from cold or addiction, teenagers with eyes too old for their years. I realized quickly that the city was a maze of hidden pain and quiet survival. One night, desperate and cold, I found myself in a run-down neighborhood on the city's edge. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the light. It was here I met Lila. She was young, no older than me, with eyes that spoke of loss and fierce determination. Her clothes were torn and stained, and she moved with a cautious grace. I learned that she cared for her mother, a frail woman ravaged by cancer, struggling without access to proper care or medicine. Lila's world was one of stolen moments. whispered prayers, and desperate acts. To ease her mother's pain, she resorted to theft, stealing what little she could from the oblivious city. Her confession cut through the chill like a flame. That night, our fragile alliance was shattered by the arrival of men in tailored suits, representatives of developers eager to clear the neighborhood for profit. Their words were venomous. Trash, junkies, filth. They demanded the residents leave, but the shadows responded. From the darkness emerged figures not quite human, skeletal, ragged, and silent. Their bony hands gripped the intruders, choking the life from their arrogance and cruelty. I watched in horror and awe as the men were stripped of their possessions and dignity, dragged into the night. The residents, survivors of forgotten battles, gathered quietly, tending to their own with quiet strength. I saw Lila weep beside her mother's still form, a heart-wrenching mixture of love and loss. In that hidden world beneath the city's surface, I found the raw truth of survival, not just of body, but of spirit. And I realized the past, no matter how far we run, never truly lets us go. It whispers in the shadows, waiting for those willing to listen. Story. Beneath the city. The Forgotten Chamber. The city I walked above was a sprawling metropolis of glass and concrete, bustling with life and noise. But beneath it all lay a hidden world, a labyrinthine network of tunnels, pipes, and forgotten chambers that stretched for miles beneath the streets. I was one of the few who knew these secrets, tasked with maintaining the city's ancient sewage system, a dank, dark underworld that few dared to enter. That morning, I set out on what was supposed to be a routine inspection. Armed with my headlamp, protective gear, and a sturdy walking stick, I descended into the tunnels. The air was thick with the stench of decay and moisture. Water dripped from rusted pipes, pooling on cracked bricks. The walls were stained with centuries of grime. As I ventured deeper, my footsteps echoed in the silence. The only sound was the distant rumble of trains overhead and the occasional scurry of unseen creatures. I reached a section beneath the railway station, a place I had passed many times without incident, but this day was different. Without warning, the bricks beneath my feet crumbled. I fell through a hidden cavity, tumbling into darkness. Pain exploded in my wrist and back as I hit the cold, wet ground. My headlamp shattered on impact, leaving me blind in the blackness. Panic surged as I fumbled for my backup torch. The faint beam flickered to life, cutting through the inky void. What I saw chilled me to my core. Scattered across the chamber floor were human bones, skulls cracked and bleached by time, ribs shattered and scattered, limbs broken and piled like forgotten relics. The air was heavy with the scent of death and abandonment. I swallowed the rising nausea, trying to steady my breathing. Then movement stirred in the shadows. Dozens of enormous rats emerged, their beady eyes reflecting the torchlight. They moved with unnerving coordination, their long tails flicking through the dust. Among them was a creature unlike any I'd seen, at least 2.5 feet long, with glowing red eyes and jagged yellow teeth. It was the Alpha, the boss rat. The other rats gave way as it approached, moving with deference. The beast sniffed near a skull beside me, then gripped it firmly between its teeth. Slowly, it began to drag an entire skeleton, still assembled, unlike the broken bones scattered around, toward a narrow crevice in the wall. Its eyes locked on me for a long, terrifying moment. I felt an unspoken warning. This was its domain. Frozen in place, I watched as the rat disappeared into the darkness, pulling its grim treasure with it. My heart pounded in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Slowly I backed away, retracing my steps until I found the collapsed floor and climbed out. The city above carried on unaware, but beneath it I had uncovered a forgotten nightmare, and nothing would ever be the same. Emerging from the suffocating darkness of that hidden chamber beneath the city, I thought the worst was behind me. But the images, the scattered human bones, the monstrous alpha rat with its glowing red eyes, the eerie silence broken only by the skittering of countless rats, clung to my mind like a relentless shadow. Days turned into restless nights. Sleep escaped me, replaced by vivid nightmares of the tunnel's cold embrace. The sharp crack of bones underfoot, the yellow gleam of predatory eyes, and the oppressive sense of being watched haunted every moment. Though doctors labeled my terror as serophobia, the irrational fear of rats, I knew it was more than that. It was a dread rooted deep in something primal and unknown. A terror not just of the creatures, but of what the chamber represented. Death, forgotten souls, and a past that refused to stay buried. Driven by a mixture of fear and fascination, I began researching the underground labyrinth I had fallen into. City archives told grim stories. The tunnels I'd traversed were built over an ancient burial ground, abandoned and buried over centuries as the city expanded. What lay beneath wasn't just brick and mortar, it was a resting place for hundreds, their names lost to time, their remains scattered and desecrated. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I had become a reluctant custodian of these forgotten dead. Weeks later, armed with reinforced gear, backup lights, and a determination that bordered on obsession, I descended again into the tunnels. This time, I ventured beyond the collapse site, deeper into the labyrinth where no one dared go. The air grew colder, damper. Shadows seemed to twist and writhe in the flickering light. Faint echoes of dripping water mingled with distant, eerie scurrying. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, unintelligible murmurs curling around the damp stone walls. My pulse quickened as the voices grew clearer, echoes of the past, or perhaps something else. A sudden movement caught my eye. A shadowy figure darted just beyond the torchlight. I froze, heart pounding, breath shallow. For a moment I thought I saw a face, pale, sorrowful, then gone as quickly as it appeared. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but something rooted me to the spot. A compulsion I couldn't explain. I pressed forward, heart heavy with a growing sense of unease. The bones I passed told stories of suffering, fragments of ribs, shattered skulls, broken limbs, each a silent witness to lives once lived and now lost. The rats were everywhere, their beady eyes reflecting light as they watched silently. The alpha was nowhere to be seen, but its presence lingered, an unspoken ruler of this underworld. Hours passed as I mapped the chamber's vastness and uncovered relics long forgotten. Rusted tools, ancient pottery shards, and remnants of coffins consumed by time. Yet, with every step, the feeling grew stronger, that I was not alone, that the shadows themselves were alive. Emerging from the depths, I carried more than just data and samples. I bore the weight of a secret buried beneath the city, a haunting reminder that some histories refuse to be forgotten. The forgotten chamber was not just a tomb, it was a living memory, demanding to be acknowledged. And I knew this journey was only beginning. Story. The vanishing. The city never truly slept. Neon lights bathed the streets in an artificial glow, reflecting off slick asphalt as rain whispered softly against the windows of towering skyscrapers. Yet beneath the perpetual hum of life, a sinister silence lingered, one that spoke of absence, of people who simply ceased to exist. Anna was the first to vanish. She was vibrant, full of laughter and hopes that stretched far beyond the narrow confines of our town. That rainy evening, after working late at a local cafe, she had stepped onto the drenched sidewalks, her coat pulled tight against the chill. The city's cacophony, a blend of honking horns, muffled footsteps and distant sirens, was her companion. But the next morning, Anna was gone. No farewell, no trace. Her apartment lay untouched, her phone silent. Her friends called, searched, begged for answers. The police arrived swiftly, conducting door-to-door inquiries, following every lead, examining the dark alleyways and dimly lit parks she might have wandered. Yet nothing surfaced. No footprints in the mud, no witnesses, no evidence. It was as if Anna had been swallowed by the city itself. Then Michael disappeared, a man who blended into the crowd so seamlessly that few knew his name. On a rainy Tuesday, he left his apartment for what seemed like a routine walk and vanished. His door was locked, his belongings undisturbed. The only anomaly was a window cracked open just enough for a slender figure to slip through, or so the investigators speculated. The city's pulse quickened with unease. Whispers grew louder in the cafes, on street corners, and in office break rooms. People spoke in hushed tones of shadows that watched too closely, of streets that changed when no one was looking. A pattern emerged. Disappearances clustered around the old industrial district, an area long abandoned and forgotten, where factories had rusted into skeletons and graffiti claimed every brick. I, a journalist drawn by the mounting fear and mystery, began to dig deeper. My investigations led me to strange characters, street artists who spoke of the fade, a phenomenon where people simply ceased to be, homeless veterans who whispered about the veil, a place between worlds, and conspiracy theorists convinced the government was conducting experiments beneath the city. Each lead seemed more surreal than the last, yet the vanishings continued. A janitor who clocked out at midnight, never to be seen again. A college student who missed her train and walked into the night. A middle-aged woman returning from a bookstore. Their stories ended abruptly, swallowed by a silence that no one could penetrate. I pored over police reports, interviewed witnesses, and walked the rain-slicked streets, searching for clues. But the city was a maze, constantly shifting, hiding its secrets behind layers of concrete and fog. The deeper I delved, the more I felt watched. Eyes in darkened windows, fleeting shadows slipping away as I approached. The line between paranoia and reality blurred. Then, one evening, as I followed a tip to an abandoned warehouse, the air changed. The usual city sounds faded, replaced by a heavy stillness. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. And in the distance, I heard a whisper, not quite human, not quite a breeze. It called my name. I turned, heart pounding. The city wasn't just alive, it was hungry, and I was standing right in its mouth. The warehouse loomed ahead like a forgotten beast, its rusted steel frame barely visible through the thick fog rolling in from the river. As I pushed open the creaking door, a chill ran down my spine, a mixture of cold air and something far darker. Inside, the space stretched vast and empty, shadows pooling in every corner. The scent of mildew and rust filled my nostrils. My flashlight's beam bounced off cracked windows and broken machinery, revealing graffiti-scrawled walls and shattered glass. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, but I couldn't turn back now. Something deeper than fear was driving me, a need to uncover the truth. I moved cautiously through the cavernous space, the floor littered with debris and discarded remnants of forgotten lives. Then, in a narrow alcove, I saw it. A faded photograph pinned to a rusted bulletin board. It showed a group of people, faces familiar from missing persons posters, smiling, alive, unaware of the fate that would soon befall them. A sudden noise made me spin around. Footsteps echoed, soft but deliberate. My heart raced as a shadow detached itself from the darkness. A figure, tall and thin, face obscured beneath a hood. "Looking for them?" a voice whispered, cold as the night air. I swallowed hard. "Who are you? What happened to the missing?" The figure stepped closer, revealing eyes that flickered with a strange light. "They walked into the city's mouth, and it swallowed them whole," the figure said. But not all disappearances are equal. Some are taken by the fade, a place where time twists and shadows consume. I tried to steady my voice. "What is the fade?" The figure smiled faintly. "A realm between worlds, where the lost linger. Those who vanish don't always die. Sometimes they become part of the city's whispering secret." Before I could ask more, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a faint scent of smoke and something metallic. My mind reeled. Was this madness, or had I finally glimpsed the truth? Determined to uncover the fade's secrets, I began to connect dots, forgotten tunnels beneath the city, strange disappearances linked to certain streets, whispered legends from those who dared not speak openly. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Friends warned me to stop. Strange figures appeared near my apartment. Calls with silence on the other end, shadows flickering just beyond the edge of vision. The city watched, waited, and whispered. And I realized that some disappearances were warnings, some vanishings were invitations, and some stories were meant to remain untold. Story. The silent witness. The city at night transformed into an eerie landscape where fog curled like ghostly fingers around lampposts and swallowed the glow of streetlights. The usual noise of bustling crowds faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from rusted gutters or the distant hum of a late-night vehicle. It was in this hush that secrets breathed, and shadows whispered things better left unheard. Emily was a woman of quiet routines and subtle observations. By day, she was a librarian, devoted to the preservation of stories and knowledge. Her life was measured, deliberate, and often solitary. She took comfort in the predictable rhythm of books, the whisper of turning pages, and the faint scent of aged paper. To the outside world, she was invisible, a soft smile behind delicate glasses. But inside, her mind was sharp, always watching, always noticing what others overlooked. One cold autumn evening, as she prepared to close the library, Emily wrapped her coat tightly around herself and stepped into the crisp air. The fog was thick, shrouding the familiar streets in a veil of uncertainty. She locked the heavy wooden doors behind her and took the shortcut through the narrow alley beside the building. A path she had walked countless times, but that night felt unfamiliar and strange. As she passed beneath flickering neon signs, a sudden sound stopped her, a sharp, raised voice cutting through the quiet. Her heart quickened. From the shadows ahead, a struggle unfolded. A man's voice, rough and angry, demanded something with harsh urgency. A woman's voice, trembling with fear and desperation, pleaded for mercy. Emily froze, torn between the instinct to flee and the urge to help. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling, but fear rooted her feet. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, silencing her courage. Minutes stretched unbearably as she stood hidden, watching the desperate scene unfold in silence. Then, as quickly as it began, the struggle ended. The man vanished into the night, leaving the woman alone, shivering and silent. Emily retreated, breathless and shaken. The next morning, the city woke to grim headlines, reports of a brutal assault in that very alley. Police cordoned off the area, gathered witness statements, and launched an investigation. The community was rattled, the event stirring a mix of fear, outrage, and sorrow. But Emily carried a secret heavier than the morning fog. She was the silent witness, the keeper of a truth that could shatter lives. Haunted by what she had seen and what she had not dared to do, Emily wrestled with a choice: speak out and risk everything, or remain silent and carry the burden alone. The city moved on, unaware that in its shadows, a quiet battle for justice had begun. The weight of silence pressed heavily on Emily's shoulders as days turned into restless nights. Every moment replayed vividly in her mind: the sharp voices, the desperate struggle, the fleeting glimpse of fear in the woman's eyes. She felt trapped between her fear of speaking out and the guilt of remaining quiet. Returning to the library felt like entering a world where nothing had changed, yet everything inside her had shifted. The shelves of books seemed to watch her, their quiet stories contrasting with the turmoil inside her heart. She kept her secret carefully, afraid that revealing the truth might unravel her life. But fate had other plans. One evening, as Emily was locking up, a soft knock echoed through the empty halls. A tall man stepped in. Detective Mark, the lead investigator on the assault case. His eyes held a mix of compassion and determination as he gently asked if she might share anything she knew. For the first time since that night, Emily felt the stirrings of hope. The kindness in Mark's voice broke through the walls of fear she had built. Slowly, cautiously, she began to recount what she had witnessed. Every detail mattered: the tone of voices, the sounds of struggle, the direction the assailant fled. Mark listened intently, offering reassurance that her bravery could bring justice. Yet the path ahead was fraught with challenges. The victim's memory was fractured by trauma. She could not recall the attacker's face. Evidence was scarce, leads were cold, and public pressure mounted. Emily found herself drawn deeper into the investigation, balancing the burden of her secret with the urgent need to find answers. Determined not to let fear silence her, Emily began her own quiet search for truth. She retraced steps, noted small details missed by others, and connected fragments of whispered rumors from the neighborhood. In this journey, she uncovered darker realities lurking beneath the city's polished surface: hidden violence, silent victims, and a community afraid to speak. Emily transformed from a silent witness to a beacon of hope, fighting to illuminate the shadows where injustice hid. But as she delved deeper, threats emerged. Ominous phone calls, shadowy figures watching from afar, and the chilling knowledge that the attacker might be closer than she ever imagined. Her courage would be tested, her resolve pushed to the brink. In the quiet stillness of the night, Emily realized that to protect the truth, she must face the darkness within and without,